This tweet by Donald Trump, we talked about it at the beginning of the show. Donald Trump tweets out that he has instructed Mnuchin to stop negotiating on any type of relief, economic relief, as a function of the pandemic. And then a couple hours later, people were like, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to admit publicly that you're the one who is closing down the conversation on this. You're supposed to pretend that Pelosi's ruined it and negotiating in bad faith and blah, blah, blah. You're not supposed to admit that you're the one who's actually doesn't want to negotiate because you have no agenda. And so he came out later with like, oh, everybody should get a check. Here is Brian Kilmeade just like asking essentially Mark Meadows, dude, don't you have anybody who's like watching him?
When you come out in business hours and with the tweet the president came out with, it tanked the market. I think it lost 400 points. And this an hour before the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, says he warned failing to inject more federal help into the economy would risk weakening the tenuous recovery. Country needs stimulus checks, many people would say, that you want to give. Having said that, being that the Fed's saying that, he's not saying Republicans or Democrats. It's to the president's advantage and the country's need to get something in there. Why can't you work something out, being that Steve Mnuchin had 2 long meetings yesterday? Did he come back, throw up his hands and tell the president, do me a favor and tweet? Did you ask the president to tweet? Could you bring us inside that process?
Well, I'll bring you inside the process. I think I was sharing that we actually had a phone call there. We can continue to have conversations that don't lead anywhere, Brian. And when you do that, we were on with Leader McCarthy, Leader McConnell, the president, myself, and as we were talking about the progress there, the numbers they were talking about are just incredibly high in terms of bailouts for states, blue-run states. The numbers they're suggesting are much higher than what the real need is. Additionally, when we look at, there was a bipartisan proposal that put out by the problem solvers. Almost at every turn, the proposal that the president put forth was actually better than that proposal. There comes a point where you understand that the other side is just playing politics. The real thing is Speaker Pelosi didn't want those checks to go out to the American people before November 3rd. She felt like it would help the president, and so she's been negotiating in that manner. Right. And so we're still willing to be engaged, but I'm not optimistic for a comprehensive deal. I am optimistic that there's about 10 things that we could do on a piecemeal basis if the speaker is willing to put it before her members.
Yeah, just to remind you, the question was, ladies and gentlemen, the question was, why did he tweet that out, that he was walking away from negotiations? And Mark Meadows is just like, I got to fill the time here. I don't want any many more questions about this. We messed up. We messed up big time. Look, it was quite clear the Republicans had no desire to go back into this. This is a failure by Nancy Pelosi dating back to April, where she, basically told even Andrew Cuomo and Jake Tapper at that time knew, like, wait a second, you have no more leverage. You just already gave the Republicans everything they wanted. What makes you think they're going to come back? Don't worry. We're going to get state and municipal funding.
Calm down, honey.
Why is this so important? We already have Moody's downgrading New York City, the bonds. We have states having to cut deep into and lay off tens of thousands of workers. And when states start to contract, this is where you get real pain. And they can't deficit spend. They don't have the ability to print money. The federal government does. So that funding is in dire need. She miscalculated as to how horrible the Republicans were. And the Republicans are such idiots. Donald Trump's White House, it's really Donald Trump is just so out of his mind right now. He doesn't realize that the only play he had was to pretend that it was Nancy Pelosi's fault. And he just announced that he was going to end the conversation. And so Mark Meadows is trying to dig himself out of this. And now they're saying, well, we'll send out a couple of checks. Of course he wants to send out checks. But the fact of the matter is, it's not meaningful. They're gonna try and block everything they can if Joe Biden gets elected. I know I went back and forth with Chris Hayes on this on Twitter a little bit. In my mind, they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster, the Democrats are, if they take control of the Senate and the House, to get any legislation passed that would provide aid for people. He thinks it's going to be through a reconciliation process, which is also, I guess, possible. But it's complicated. And so you're not going to see anything go out the door until February 1 at the earliest. That's if everything goes well. It's probably going to be more like March 1st that people are going to start to see any type of relief. I mean, that's 6 months away.
Well, according to his more recent tweets, he's ready to send us the $1,200 checks right now.
I mean, he might be the only. I don't know. I don't know if I would do that if I was Pelosi at this point. I mean, I guess like she's in a tough position by her own making because they gave away all the leverage when they basically said the Fed is going to provide free money for corporations. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if people, I mean, not that the votes really are going to matter that much at this point if they refuse to count the ballots, but people might be more likely to vote for Trump if he gave them $1,200 and the Democrats gave them nothing, regardless of the reason behind that.
Yep. Without a doubt. Also, we are looking at across the country, different dates in different places. But we are looking at a mass eviction crisis, among other crises. Here's AOC on MSNBC last night making that case.
And we're already starting to see warning signs of the severe economic and health fallout that is to come. We are on the brink of an eviction crisis, a mass eviction crisis here in our district, but also across the country. 30 to 40 million people are at risk of being evicted because the president has decided to walk away from every working person in this country. Now, that's before we even get to mortgages. It's before we get to unemployment extension. It's before we get to a second stimulus check. In addition, just as we're entering the fall, we are at risk of a second spike. And what we are seeing here in New York City, which is a city that has some of the strictest COVID guidelines and some of the highest rates of mask wearing adherence in the country, we are still starting to experience areas where there's kind of a second spike. 9 zip codes in New York City are at risk of being shut down totally or partially due to a secondary fall wave. Now, if we decide, and if the president and the GOP follow through with walking away from COVID relief, we are staring down the barrel at one of the largest mass eviction crises in the history of this country since the Great Depression. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at a potential second wave that could be catastrophic. We are looking at the potential of hunger in the United States exploding on a level that we have never seen since the Great Depression. And all of it is preventable. All of it. All we need to do is authorize a second stimulus check. We need to make sure that we get state and local funding so that municipal governments can stay above water at least through the end of the year. We need to make sure that we are funding large-scale testing and tracing programs, and we need to make sure that we're really developing a vaccine responsibly and not pushing one out for the sake of an election.
I mean, there you have it. I mean, the Pared Down Heroes Act is in some respect what she's talking about. It's really just a shorter timeline.
Yeah. I mean, obviously she's correct about the legislative measures that need to be taken. I would only add that, people don't have to wait around for this to happen, right? We can look back to the early 1900s, the tenants' rights movement, right? Like people would get evicted from their tenement apartments, and then these tenants protection groups would move them back in, and they would form a hard picket, and they would keep the landlord from kicking them out. And that is something that we're seeing starting to happen again. Yep. And you know what? The more people band together and exert their power, the less the landlords are going to be inclined to fight them. I mean, some definitely will, no matter what. But maybe some of them would use their immense political power to say, hey, you got to give people money because they're not paying the rent, and we're going to get foreclosed on.
Yep.
That's the only acceptable thing for landlords to do. I think, community organization against evictions over the next few months is going to be very important. If landlords are upset about that, they should contact their representative.